steering in my Tacoma is a little bit stiff, and it's always been that way. I've never had that problem with my Chevy. My Chevy trucks are always easy to steer, but this is a little bit difficult, and it's really not too hard, but it's enough where it's an effort.
Yeah. Ken, what we wind up with, that one still uses a power steering pump. It's still a hydraulic power steering system as opposed to an electronic one, still in a 2012 Tacoma. What bases the steering ease, as far as less effort goes, on a hydraulic power steering system is the pressure relief valve in the power steering pump itself. It's like this. There's a valve in that pump, and what it does is it's spring loaded, and it's set for a certain pound of pressure. And if it exceeds that, it'll bypass your steering rack and everything else. So you only get one regulated pressure, and it doesn't blow anything apart. Now, it would depend on the spring pressure and how many pounds of pressure the pump was producing. Now, if a person was to go in there and probably put a little bit of a stiffer spring in that pressure relief valve in that power steering pump, it would probably make the steering easier. And that's usually what you're kind of dealing with, And on your other trucks, you mentioned Chevrolets and Fords, stuff like that. Well, it would depend on how many pounds of pressure the actual pump was producing. Now, there is other things that can cause a stiffer steering, and that is if you've got a front end part like a ball joint that's seizing up on you or something like that, which does happen quite often because, most of the front end parts, the ball joints, tire rods, stuff like that, are not serviceable to where we can't add grease to them like we did in years past. And a lot of times the grease will turn into like wax, and you won't get those parts lubricated properly. In a case like that, if we suspect something along those lines, what we do is we take the tire rod ends loose on your spindles on the left and the front, and then we turn them by hand, usually like on an alignment rack when the front end's sitting on turn plates. That way we can find out if there's a ball joint actually binding up. But if the ball joints are good and free, and there's no leaks in the steering rack, usually it's just the way the pump is manufactured. And, you probably put another power steering pump on it. May make matters better, but then a person to make it even, if it would be still the same issue, putting a heavier spring in the pressure relief valve could possibly help matters, but there's really no guarantee, is what I'm saying. These are things that a person would have to try. But the first thing that I'd want to do is make sure there wasn't any ball joints, lower ball joints weren't binding up. That should be tested and checked. And if they're good and free, then, probably move on to something hydraulic like the pump, just not producing as much pressure to help the vehicle steer easier. So, but if you need any help with it, give us a holler. We'd be more than glad to take a look at it. But those are the issues. If you're not having to chase the steering, the ball joints are probably all right. When I say chase it, see if we got one binding up, you're constantly steering the vehicle. It doesn't want to return to center like it's supposed to. But if it's returning to center when you turn to the left or the right while you're driving it, it's going to be most likely a hydraulic type of issue. But if you're having to chase the steering with the steering wheel constantly, you probably got a ball joint that's seizing up. I hope that helps you, Ken.